Okay, this project is going to be replacing a broken tenon. And that's a very common task for a pipe repairman. In principle, nothing could be simpler. You just attach a new little tube to a plastic widget. In practice, it's a pig. There's a lot that can go wrong, and a good result, meaning where the stem aligns with the shank perfectly, is tricky. So here's the patient. It's a really nice little GBD Virgin, love it shape, silver rondelle on it, which is that's something collectors are fond of. This one I've chosen as a unusual specimen to illustrate something else. Normally the tenon breaks off cleanly. You just end up with a little tube in there like a tiny beer can, and it snaps off flush with the base of the stem. In this case, it's all like glass shards, shattered looking, and that's because somebody at some point in the past decided that they were going to enlarge the airway. A common enough thing, very popular for a while, and not quite so much anymore, but you still hear about it. And what people do is get a hold of one of these tapered drill bits, and they'll shove it in the stem and crank away and enlarge it. Normally, when they do that wrong or badly, they end up cracking the surface of the blade or somewhere near the bite zone, because that's where it's thinnest and weakest. In this case, somebody really got down and applied a lot of pressure, because there's actually a crack that runs from the base of this shattered portion here to into the side of this. The barrel of this saddle stem actually cracked, and I'm guessing that the cracks that were induced by this enlargement, the guy plugged it in, smoked it a while, and then when it got sticky from humidity or whatever it might have been, he gave it a twist. Well, there were already some cracks in it, so it just popped like a Christmas ornament. So we're going to level that, drill a hole, very, very tricky hole, exactly a certain depth at a certain shape with axial alignment and a very specific size. Show you how to do that. We'll get the old tenon out of there, which can be tricky. Do not be tempted to use a deck screw that applies outward pressure. These screw threads engage by just mashing up against stuff. They compress the material, and like in a pine board or a deck screw, or like a deck, you don't want to do that in a pipe. It will press outward and crack the shank far too often for comfort. Sometimes it won't, but often it will. The way to avoid that completely is to use a tap. And most people know what a tap is. If you don't, it's basically a screw that has been designed to remove material, create threads in a hole by cutting them. It doesn't use outward pressure, it uses blades. They're fine, but you can feel them, you can't see them very well. So we're going to thread this into there and then attach this portion of it. This comes out of a chuck to what's called a slide hammer. Screw it in here and pull that thing out. I'll show you how to do that. And the tenon we're going to replace it with is one of these Delrin segments. Now you can get Delrin in rod stock form like this and cut it to any size and shape you like. Most standard shapes of an average size are covered by a selection of these. They're not pre-made, they're actually machined. They're not molded, but it saves a bit of work and you end up with exactly the same result. The way to do that, or rather the way we're going to do that, is to take a pre-drilled blank of vulcanite and screw that in, and then treat this as exactly like we're cutting a whole new stem from a piece of rod-stock. Now, we only have to reduce the diameter of this a half a millimeter or so in this case to get it to fit this particular pipe. But that's what we'll do. Once that is a perfect fit, we'll texture this a little bit more than it already is, push it in there, and then I'll show you how to glue the stem on there in a way that won't glue it to the pipe. You know, you could end up with something you can't take apart. We're going to be using some very tough epoxy here to prevent gluing the pipe together, as well as get it completely aligned up, down, and left to right so that there's no sign that the pipe has ever been repaired. It's fairly easy to get a functional repair of a broken tenon. It's quite tricky to get an invisible repair. So that is it. I'll break this up, as I imagine I'll do forevermore. It seems to work well. Each separate step will be made into its own video of 6 or 8 minutes, something like that, so that you don't have to write down times, you know, like between 22 minutes and 27 minutes and all that, because this will take maybe an hour to do in total, 45 minutes to an hour, and rather than have to hunt and peck to find something to watch it a second time, you'll just be able to click on it. So that's it. Let's get started.